Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through Scripture for January the 30th. Hey, you've almost made it a month. I hope you've stuck with it, but even if you've missed a day or two, don't sweat it. Just get right back up on the horse. We're going to fail forward in this thing together. You might miss some days, but you know what? The idea is to get and develop healthy habits. So hopefully you've stuck with it. Our readings for today come in Exodus chapter 10, 11, and part of Exodus 12, part of Matthew chapter 20, and then excerpts from Psalm 25 and Proverbs chapter 6. And when I read the readings for today, and really the whole Exodus narrative up to this point, I can't help but make two observations about it. One is really the question, is God fair? And that's a fair question, right? No pun intended. And so here's the short answer to that. No, God is not fair. You say, wait a minute, what do you mean, Jeremy? What are you talking about? Well, let's look at the parable in Matthew chapter 20 for a second. The parable of the workers that Jesus gives. Now, in that, there was workers that worked all day, and there were workers that worked half a day, and there were workers that only worked 1 hour. And they each got the same amount of pay. Now, in today's culture, that is not fair at all. The people that worked all day should have gotten more, and the people that only worked an hour should have gotten less. That's definitely not fair. When you look at the accountings of the Pharaoh hardening his heart, the people of Egypt were the ones that faced the wrath and the suffering because of their leader's heart. That doesn't sound fair either. Well, God is not a fair God, but he is a good God, and he is a God of mercy. If you go back to the parable in Matthew chapter 20, you have to remember that this is a parable with regards to salvation. And salvation in and of itself is not fair. It is grace. It is mercy. You see, salvation is getting what we don't deserve. Remember, what we have earned because of our sin, as we'll see in Romans, is death. Our wage, what we have earned, is death. That is what it is. And yet God, in his great mercy, has chosen to give us blessed salvation. And so whether you were early in life accepting Christ, whether you did it sometime as an adult, or whether you did it on your deathbed, you have the opportunity for salvation regardless. That's not fair. That's grace. Now, you might go back to the readings in the Exodus and you go, man, these are really, really harsh things that have done, that God has done. And these plagues get progressively worse and worse and worse until they come to what we would say is the worst of all, and that is the plague of the death of firstborns. And that is a hard account to read. And you look at that and you go, man, Jeremy, you said God's a God of justice, but how is that justice? Well, that's a fair question also. But I want you to think back to the beginning of the Exodus encounter and think back to the Pharaoh that had forgotten Joseph and his ancestors, or forgotten who Joseph was and decided that he was afraid of the Israelites. What was the command that he gave to the two midwives? It was to kill the firstborns. It was to kill the boys. It was to kill the males. So God is meting out justice to the Egyptians for their hardened hearts, for their mistreatment of the Israelites. Now, keep in mind that even though Pharaoh was the head guy, all of Egypt was mistreating Israel. All of Egypt was abusing and hurting them and harming them. The Egyptians all carried out the orders of the Pharaoh, but they did it willingly, and they did it in many ways gladly. That's one of the reasons why Moses came to the defense of the Israelite that he saw being persecuted by the Egyptian soldier, by the Egyptian slave driver, if you will. So God's justice, remember, God has a long memory. And so God is going to remember these things. And God is exacting out justice. God is meting out exactly the justice of what the Egyptians had. But it came with another message. And we talked about this in previous devotions. This is about God sending a message to the rest of the world saying, I am the God, the one and only big G God. Not little g God, big G God. You can have your God of the sky. You can have your fertility God, the God of frogs, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, I am bigger and more powerful than every single one of these examples. And so God was delivering a very clear and resounding message. And it was going to, as we see, it was going to pave the way for the Israelites getting into the promised land in the future. So, back to the question, is God a fair God? He's not. And frankly, I'm grateful that he isn't, because otherwise I would get exactly what I deserve. Have a blessed day. We'll see you next time.